I'm Heather Marie Montilla, and you're watching PBS Books. Thank you for joining us. PBS Books, in collaboration with Kansas City PBS and KERA, is pleased to host a conversation with best-selling authors Angeline Bolle and Trang Ton Tran, who both depict their heritage in their fiction in compelling ways. PBS Books is proud to partner with the Library of Congress to promote their 2023 National Book Festival. Let's take a moment to hear from the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden.
I'm Carla Hayden, Librarian of Congress, and I want to give a thank you to PBS Books for supporting the National Book Festival. Hope you can join us in Washington and online for this year's festival on Saturday, August the 12th.
Well, the festival already happened. It was free and open to the public. It was open to everyone, huge crowds, and it focused on everyone has a story. Since then, the Library of Congress has worked to prepare all of that festival content, all of those conversations, and they're now available to you. They're representing the voices of 78 outstanding authors. So go to loc.gov/bookfest. Well, since July 30th, PBS Books and PBS stations across the nation have been hosting a series of 10 virtual events with 11 authors. This represents the last one, but all of that content is still available for all of you. So go to pbsbooks.org or the National Book Festival website. Let's take a moment to hear from our station partner.
I am Danita Malvern, Director of Engagement at KERA in North Texas, and I am delighted to introduce this evening's event with award-winning amazing authors Angeline Bolle and Trang Ton Tran in celebration of the Library of Congress National Book Festival. I am proud that KERA is committed to promoting the stories of contemporary authors. There is no question that books have the power to share people's stories. Just like the Library of Congress National Book Festival theme, everyone has a story. For over 2 decades, the Library of Congress National Book Festival has brought huge crowds of people to DC, and we are delighted to support the Library of Congress' important work. We hope that you'll join us on our journey tonight and learn more about best-selling YA authors Angeline Bolle and Trang Ton Tran, who explore important themes of identity and diverse heritage with young, trailblazing protagonists. Their works help young adults and not so young adults explore and reflect on these important topics. We hope you'll enjoy tonight's conversation. Back to you, Heather.
Well, thanks. We're so delighted to be able to partner with your station. It is always so wonderful to be able to have a local connection. Today's conversation features Angeline Bolle and Trang Ton Tran to discuss their work and their involvement in the festival. We'll be discussing Bolle's latest work, Warrior Girl Unearthed, which chronicles Perry Firekeeper Birch on a high-stakes journey about the power of discovering your stolen history, and Trang's latest book, She is a Haunting, exploring Jade's adventure to her estranged father's family home in Vietnam. Let's meet the authors. Angeline Bolle is an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, and she is a storyteller who writes about her Ojibwe community in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. She is a former director of the Office of Indian Education at the U.S. Department of Education. Bolle lives in Southwest Michigan, but her home will always be on Sugar Island, Michigan. Her debut novel, Firekeeper's Daughter, received many awards, including a Prince Award, William C. Morris Award, Walter Dean Myers Award, and an American Indian Youth Literature Honor. Her newest release is what we'll be discussing today, Warrior Girl Unearthed, which was featured in the 2023 National Book Festival. Welcome, Angeline.
It's a pleasure to be here. Miigwech, thank you.
So glad to have you. Well, to also add to the conversation, we are pleased to have Trang Ton Tran. Trang Ton Tran is a Vietnamese American author who writes emotional speculative stories that highlight food, belonging, and the Vietnamese diaspora. They're an alumni of the Writing Barn's Rainbow Weekend and Tin House's Young Adult Fiction Workshop. When not writing, they are busy trying new food and watching zombie movies. Tran's debut novel, She is a Haunting, was featured at the 2023 National Book Festival. Welcome, Trang.
Hi, so happy to be here. Thank you.
We are so happy to have you and to also have Angeline here as well. So I want to just welcome you both and to get into the conversation. Is it possible, we're going to start a little bit by asking Angeline to share a little bit about her story, and then we're going to talk more with Trang about your debut novel. And we're so excited that you both are here. So thank you so very much. So Angeline, can you briefly describe your book in Warrior Girls Unearthed? Can you take us through the premise, a little history, just in your own words? What is it?
My second book, Warrior Girl Unearthed, I pitched it as Indigenous Lara Croft, but instead of raiding tombs, Perry Firekeeper Birch is raiding museums and private collections to retrieve stolen ancestral remains and sacred items that do not belong in museums to bring back home to Sugar Island. And being that she's 16 years old, none of her heists go exactly as she planned. And that's Warrior Girl Unearthed.
So how is Warrior Girl Unearthed connected with your best-selling book, Firekeeper's Daughter? Is it?
It is. So the twins in my first book, Firekeeper's Daughter, it's 10 years later, and the twins are now 16, and it's the feisty twin Perry who is the narrator for the story. And so they are nieces to Donis Fontaine, the main character in Firekeeper's Daughter, and we get to see some familiar faces from my debut novel. And I just love I think of my community as, all of these connected extended families. And I like that approach with my writing too. So I mention a character in my debut and, 10 years later, they are the protagonist of the second book.
I love it. And I love that connection. And I think your fans are really excited too about it. So who is the Warrior Girl? And can you discuss Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, the importance of that act of returning cultural items to Indigenous tribes?
Sure. So Congress passed, and it was signed into law in 1990, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And what that says is that all museums and institutions that receive any public funding, that they are to inventory their collection of Native remains and objects, items, relics, artifacts, and they're to provide these inventories to tribes. And then tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations can request to repatriate, bring home those remains and items that they have connection to. It was passed in 1990, but there are still more than half of our ancestors that are still held in museums. And, tribes really have to go through a lot to prove the connection and be able to take possession and return these ancestors back to the earth.
And Warrior Girl, is that a real, is that, yes.
Yes, she's based on an actual ancestor that friends of mine who do repatriation work had met her. So she's an ancestor, her ancestral remains. She was a teen female, and she was buried with her a flint blade that was significant size that had been lashed to a deer antler, most likely. And she had previous wounds that had healed. They can tell from the bone knitting that she had been in fights before, and they could tell which injury she died from and which injury she recovered from. And since she was buried with her knife, they knew that that was special and that she was a protector of her community. And so that's the, warrior girl is an actual ancestor.
It's breathtaking on so many levels for people who haven't yet heard that story. The novel tackles issues also of missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is something we've discussed on my show over the last few years. Could you share why addressing this issue, why you chose to address this issue in your book with a young adult audience?
Because the ownership of Indigenous bodies, past and present, is a continuous issue. And, universities and museums and institutions, they want the bones of our ancestors and are very reluctant to return them. And our Indigenous women go missing and face the highest risks of violence. And there is not enough done to find them and bring them home. And so I really did see that connection between the value of Indigenous bodies, past and present, and draw a connection to that.
Well, thank you. So we're going to switch gears, transition a little bit for a few moments, and talk to Trang. Trang, can you briefly summarize your debut novel?
Yeah, so She is a Haunting is a YA gothic horror novel, and it's about 17-year-old Jade Wynn, who is angry and closeted, and she is forced to go back and visit her estranged father in Vietnam and discovers that the French colonial house that he's renovating has sinister plans for her and her family. This book is a lot about family. It's a family, but it's a family story, but it's also a coming of age story that really explores what it means to belong in a place.
So the Vietnamese diaspora, it's an important element in your storytelling. And I was hoping you could elaborate on how your personal experiences really influence and shape the characters in your book.
Yeah, so I have a very big family. My mom is the oldest of 11,
Uh-huh.
and my mom came to the US in 1987, and a lot of her family members came too. And I guess growing up, there was just so many stories about like what it's like to live in Vietnam and how life is different here. But as time goes on, you realize that like my mom has spent more time in the US than she has in Vietnam, actually. And I was born in the US, and there's this sense of being in between places, right? So I was born here, but when other people look at me, they don't necessarily think that I belong here. And I'm Vietnamese, but if I go back to Vietnam, I really stick out because I don't speak Vietnamese well, for example. So there's this really weird in between space that a lot of kids in the diaspora are living. And I felt like it was something interesting to explore in a book. Like how does it feel to not belong somewhere, or like to desperately want to belong somewhere and feel like everyone is telling you no? And that's sort of central to Jade's emotional journey, because she wants to belong somewhere. She wants to live her life, but she's afraid of sort of experiencing that rejection.
So talk to me about this house, right? It's
Mm.
a family house, French colonial. Can you talk a little bit about, is there a metaphor? Is this from personal experience? You have a
Mm.
house that, that scares you. Talk to me about this
Yeah.
house.
Yeah, so I don't have a personal house inspiration, but I was inspired by the actual French colonial houses that are in Đài Lạt. So Đài Lạt is in the central highlands of Vietnam. So it's like in the mountains. So the weather is very temperate compared to the rest of the country, which is very humid and very hot. And in the early 20th century, French colonizers wanted a vacation home, and so I think it was in 1907, they settled in Đài Lạt because the weather is so nice there. So they're not, even now, there's all these abandoned French colonial homes in the mountains that no one lives in. And so I drew a lot of inspiration from these buildings that must have experienced and seen so much and are still standing. And there's a lot of French architecture in Vietnam. And so I wanted to explore that, the beauty that people see in these buildings, but also sort of the underlying horrors of like what happened there.
I know there's been some comparison with your book to Mexican Gothic. How do you feel about this comparison? And in what ways do you think your book offers a unique and distinct perspective within the genre?
So Mexican Gothic's incredible. So I'm very pleased that people see the connection, right? But I think it also speaks to how colonization happened across many different places that are very far away from each other, who on the surface don't have any similarities, but may have the resources and the things that other people wanted to take. And so I'm happy that these stories, especially for Gothic horror, which explores a lot of like how the past haunts the present. I'm happy that there are so many different voices, many diverse voices, kind of exploring sort of the intersection between you know this horrible thing that happened with actual history, and really being able to explore sort of all the terrible things that happened. And I think particularly with She is a Haunting, it is a coming of age story, so I feel like it offers that element that's a little bit different from Mexican Gothic, in that it is about a 17-year-old girl. It is about her belonging in a space, and explores a lot about her queer identity. She's bisexual, but she's closeted, and it looks into, and it's also a present day novel. So it's not in the past; it's present day. So you can really see how the past in Jade's life is continuing to influence her and her family.
Well, now I'd like to have you and Angeline in, because what's really amazing, you both have gotten lots of kudos for both of your books. And I wanted to talk a little bit to Angeline about, you've gotten kudos lots about lots of things, but your book recently, many have said that your portrayal of Ojibwe culture in the novel it's been commended for its authenticity, its depth. How did you ensure that you presented Ojibwe language, history, and practices in a way that both educates the reader and keeps the story accessible and engaging?
I thought about former students of mine. I've always worked in Indian education. And so, I thought about, former students wanting to make sure the information was accessible. But really, with the cultural information, I, have incredible cousins, and I always would ask myself, should I include this? What would my cousins say? Or, talking to my cousins about, how do you pronounce this word or that word? And I had a mantra while I was writing both of my books, and it was that I write to preserve my culture, and I edit to protect it. And so I was very mindful of Indigenous knowledge, and including only that which served the story, and uh, that's what I would include. I purposely left out actual ceremony and things that people outside of my community do not have access or purpose to.
Thank you. Trang, you also have gotten lots of praise, and specifically representation of Jade's sexuality in your book has received a lot of praise, particularly in the way that Jade's anxieties and fears surrounding her identity are handled. Could you discuss your approach to writing about Jade's sexual identity and the importance of this representation for you?
Yeah. So with Jade's sexuality, I really wanted to portray something that felt honest and felt true, especially for someone who is as young as Jade to feel like she's not enough, and especially for bisexual folks to feel like they're not they're not queer enough to be in the community and yet not straight enough to be among heterosexual couples, for example. So I really wanted to portray someone who felt like they were in this between, again, that between space, feeling like neither side was really accepting towards them, and having her work through those anxieties of like, why does she have to weigh her validity against what other people are saying? She has always been enough, and I felt like that's something that young readers often need to hear, and even older readers, because there's not a time by which you have to come out. There's not a timeline. The only timeline is yours, and whenever you are ready to kind of take those steps, and or even if you never take those steps due to the circumstances in your life, you are enough of whatever you are.
I think that's really beautiful because I think we are enough of whatever we are, and that self-discovery of who we are. Both of your books, in each of their own ways, they're exploring that, right? Both of your books address ancestral heritage, self-discovery, and they explore themes of trauma, generational divides, unspoken pain. How did you both go about weaving these themes into a narrative? And then how did you also pull, you've started to talk about the personal aspects, but how did you pull your own personal aspects into that as well? If we could start with Angeline.
I, hmm, could I have a little more time to
Of
ponder
course,
this?
of course. Do you, Trang?
Um, I I think it's just, at least for She is a Haunting, because it is very focused on a very specific Vietnamese family, and I wanted to make these characters feel very real, like someone that you can know. And from my, from being in my community, there are so many different types of people who experience different things in the diaspora and feel different things. And so I wanted that variety to be on the page for me. And so often you see, Jade and her father, who are, you know, who feel like they're opposites and who have a very difficult relationship. And yet it comes out that they maybe want the same thing, but they're going about very different ways to get it. And so being able to deeply explore something that is also really meaningful to me, because one of the inspirations for the book is drawing from, the things that I don't know about my family, and sort of that drive for me to understand, the history that we have in Vietnam and the history that we're building here. And, having to learn to be okay that there are some answers that you might never have. So I really wanted to tell a story about one specific family. And so I stayed very focused and try to make them as real as possible.
Let me just go down that road a little bit more. Did you go to Vietnam to do research? I mean, you refer to specific houses in the mountain, like how did you visit? Did you go on family excursions or did you go independently? Could you talk a little bit about that process?
So I actually wrote the book during the pandemic, so there was no traveling involved. So there was a lot of research going on online, and also having conversations with my mom about what it's like to visit Vietnam and what that particular region in Đài Lạt is like, because she's been there, and also speaking to other family members about what their perspective was on different relationships during this time period, things that they may know.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Okay, Angeline, back in the hot seat.
Yeah.
So just if you could share a little bit about themes of trauma, generational divides, unspoken pain, and how ancestral heritage and self-discovery have been written in and woven into your novel.
Sure. So I would say that I am probably more like Perry's twin sister, Pauline, with very high functioning anxiety and, some self soothing behaviors. I wrote about, trichotillomania, which is like a hair pulling, it's like a comfort thing. I wanted to My books are all about representation. And so, whereas I more closely aligned with Donis, the protagonist in my first book, being a very light skinned Ojibwe girl with a native dad and a non native mom, I really wanted to represent, cousins of mine who are Ojibwe and Black. And that's another, big, topic and issue about identity for those who are Ojibwe and also Black, and what that connection is with the Black community. And so I definitely had so much help in, writing from that perspective as well, and dealing with generational trauma. But whenever I do so, I always make a note to include generational joy, the memories and wonderful things that we also got from those generations before us, because our ancestors gave us more than pain and trauma. And I always want to make sure that my writing reflects the joyful things that we are so fortunate to have.
I think that's a great point. And it's easy to sometimes talk about the trauma, but the joy is very much, I think, a critical part of your storytelling. So thank you for integrating that into the conversation. Both of your stories, and Trang has been talking a lot about coming of age, right? When I was reading them both, I thought these girls are the same age. It would almost be fun to have them meet. Because they're both talking about college, right? Like money is an issue in both of their realms as well, which is also was interesting to me. You both write for a young, well, it's YA, young adult, but it's interesting because this is a moment in history where everyone's reading young adults. And maybe it's because people my age, we want to be young at heart still. But it's a YA book. So could you talk a little bit about why you made that choice to make it for an intended audience, and also the age of your protagonist, why you chose that age, why that was critical to your story?
Well, for me, Perry is 16, and I think that's such a critical age. It's, you know, uh, claiming your identity and thinking about the larger world. And so for Perry, it's, she is known as kind of the slacker and the twin that doesn't worry or get anxiety about anything. And she does care very deeply about things. Um, and repatriation is one of those issues that once she becomes aware of it, she very much becomes a warrior that wants to do right and wants to make sure that these ancestors get back home. She doesn't necessarily think about the consequences of how she goes about making that happen. Um, and so I love writing young adult because, one, I think young adult literature, I believe we get to our inciting incidents quicker. I think that young adult literature pivots quicker and addresses social issues far quicker than adult literature. And I also believe there's an implied respect and relationship with the reader to first do no harm, knowing that this might be the first time a reader is reading about sexual assault or lateral violence in the Black and Ojibwe communities, or different issues. And so I really love writing for young adult because I feel like that's where the exciting things are happening, and it's also where we have such respect and care for our readers.
Thank you. Trang.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also want to add that for me, so Jade is 17 in the book, and I feel like 17 is such an intense age. It's when you're young, you're a teenager, you feel everything so intensely. And I feel like that's really fun to write about, right? Someone who is on the verge of becoming an adult, like Jade, who's 17, who's about to head off into the world, and she thinks that everything is just going to magically resolve itself when she gets to college, because there's just a button that she's going to turn on and she's going to be an adult. But you have to learn that you never really feel like an adult. And so sort of she's experiencing that disconnect and realizing that she has to work on her own journey and realizing what she wants rather than thinking that time is just going to resolve it. And specifically for Jade and why I wanted this haunted house story to be young adult, I also wanted it to be fun. I didn't have many or any books with Vietnamese protagonists when I was growing up. And so I really wanted to have a book that had a Vietnamese American girl on it, just trying to live her best life and discovering that this house does not want her to live her best life.
Well, thank you for that as well. For those people just joining us, I'm Heather Marie Montilla, and you are watching PBS Books. This is our last virtual conversation with the Library of Congress National Book Festival. We are here speaking with Angeline Bolle and with Trang Tran Tran, and we're discussing their books that are both highly acclaimed and they are both young adults, and we're back in the conversation. Okay, ladies. So you have both discussed how your firsthand experience and cultural background, they really bring this unique perspective to your storytelling. And as you know, the theme of this year for the National Book Festival was Everyone Has a Story. Your works explore culture, tradition, and values, and you both have done a really wonderful job in making those accessible. Was this always your goal as a writer? Is that what you set out to do, or at what moment in your evolution as a writer did it occur?
Well, for me, I had a full career in, Native American education at the tribal, state, and federal levels. And so my writing career was, kind of a second act or third act for me. I was not published until I was 56. And so, for me, it was, I had never read a story with a Native protagonist until I was maybe a senior in high school. And the representation that I had seen through the years, it did not reflect my reality. And I worked with so many students and then my own children and relatives that I knew I wanted to tell stories where we saw ourselves, our aunties, our grandparents, and I wanted to share and tell these stories from my community. And James Joyce wrote, "In the particular, we find the universal." And I'm really proud that I wrote a story that was, these stories that are very specific to my culture and my community, but yet resonate with so many people beyond that. And I think that's how we create greater understanding and hopefully make things better for the next generation.
Thank you. Trang?
I've always wanted to be a writer, but of course, I pursued a different career for stability and because my mother told me to. But it was, during the pandemic was when I was like, I have to chase this dream that I've always wanted. And that was when I quit my job and gave myself a year to do it. But what was important to me was that was also when I started seeing a lot of diverse books, particularly in YA, and realizing that, wow, I can write characters that have names similar to mine, who look similar to me, who have experience similar to me. And that's how She is a Haunting was kind of came out, is, really looking into the fears that this one Vietnamese American teenager would have about belonging in a space. And so I'm so happy to be able to be writing for teens now and just providing a choice of book. I don't want to be the only representation, just a choice of horror book for them to pick up that's like, wow, this is great.
That is great. Well, you both were invited this year to the Library of Congress National Book Festival. What did it mean to you?
For me, I've attended the National Book Festival as in the audience. I remember getting to hear Roxane Gay speak and just being in such awe. I lived and worked in the DC area, and so that was like an annual thing for me, was like connecting and seeing these uh, writers that had so much to say that resonated with me. And so for me to have been invited and be a part of it, it is beyond any dream that I had when I thought about writing this story and reaching people. So, just an honor.
Trying.
It was an honor for me as well. It was my first time attending, and when I first started writing this book, I didn't have that many expectations about where it was going to go, whether it was even going to be published. And so to be invited and to be able to speak to so many readers is such an honor. And being able to tell my mom that I went to this space that our family's never been before was just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the first time I got to go was 2019, and it just for me it was so amazing. I was like, I got to see my favorite authors. I got to find new favorite authors. And what excites me now too, and as we speak, is that now all of that content is available for people to be able to go through and curate their own experience. All of the content from the festival is available. And that's also so wonderful, because I think when I think of the Library of Congress, it is the library for everyone in the nation. And so for people to be able to take advantage of this special gift to the nation, to be able to fall in love with authors across the great nation, it's exciting. So, all right. So some other fun questions for you guys. And I think I know some of them, but what are your favorite genres for reading for your own pleasure? And do you have favorite influences?
Oh, I love reading psychological thrillers. Gillian Flynn, Megan Abbott, Courtney Summers, Melissa Albert. Yeah, there's just some incredible authors that tell these tales that keep me guessing. And so, yeah, psychological thrillers are where I'm at.
Awesome. What about you, Trang?
I read a lot of horror and also thriller, but I really love contemporary stories as well.
Great. What about favorite libraries? One of the things we always see is a correlation. Obviously, we all love the Library of Congress, but we find that authors really have a special library and even a special librarian, they sometimes quote, that spark that love of reading, which is often the basis for writing.
For me, it's this little tiny library in Cedarville, Michigan, and it's in the Lake Chanot Islands area, and it's got such, I think, outreach and connection with the community, and there's just something about it when you walk in. It just feels unlike any other library I've been in. It feels so personal and welcoming, and when you walk in, you're not surprised to see a fire in the fireplace and people sitting in comfortable chairs talking about books, and children sitting around and being read a story. It's just one of those places that seems like the keystone or touchstone for a community.
What about you, Trang?
I actually have two libraries. So the first one is the South Philadelphia Library. I have very fond memories of my mom taking me and my cousins to the South Philadelphia Library because they had I think a very small collection of books in the Vietnamese language, and my mom loves to read. So I have just great memories visiting there. And the second library is Temple University, is where I went to college, and I would just check out all the Stephen King books to read during college.
Well, as I've already shared with you off camera, I am always afraid of horror horror movies, horror books. But I can live vicariously through you. Upcoming projects, Can you guys share any books you're working on? Like, I know it's probably been a bit of a whirlwind with all of the acclaim you've received for these novels, but could you share what's upcoming for you both?
For me, it's working on my third book. I have a great idea, and no announcement has been made yet, but perhaps one is forthcoming. And then I'm also uh, involved with the Netflix series. I sold the film rights for Firekeeper's Daughter, my debut, to the Obamas and their company, Higher Ground Productions. Everything's on pause with the writer's strike, which I fully support. And once we pay writers a living wage and meet their reasonable demands, I am sure that Firekeeper's Daughter will continue and move into production.
Well, that sounds exciting. That's awesome. Trang.
I'm working on my second YA book, and it's centering another Vietnamese American family. I'm also working on an adult horror book that I'm really excited to dig into.
Well, this has been so great getting to spend this time with both of you and learning about your work and your creativity and really your craft and helping to further provide representation for readers and for people to see themselves, their reflection, and to learn more about other cultures. So I want to thank you for your work and for coming on PBS Books today and your support of the National Book Festival. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
Gwetch, thank you so much.
Oh,
And
thank
for
you.
Trang, I was honored to read an advanced reader copy, and to have colonization be a villain in the story, that was very close to my heart. And so I am so pleased at the success that your debut has had.
Thank you so much.
Well, we need to close the program, but I'm so glad that we were able to showcase these two amazing writers. We'd like to thank our library partners across the country, as well as numerous PBS stations throughout our nation. But most importantly, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Just a reminder, all of the Library of Congress National Book Festival content is now available. You can go to loc.gov/bookfest to explore all the fabulous content, including interviews that feature today's amazing guests, Angeline Bully and Trang Tran Tran. I hope you'll be able to delve more into the content. Well, until next time, I'm Heather Marie Montilla, and happy reading.